Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for this law firm special, Hindsight 2020, recovering from disasters in legal. The way it will work today, we're hoping to run for around 60 minutes including Q&A. If you want to type questions, the right hand side of, in the panel on the right hand side, please feel free to do so and we'll pick those up at the end, as many as we can. Just so that you're aware, the webinar is being recorded and will be available afterwards. So, by way of an agenda, so my name is Julie Goddard. I'm used to work at the SRA as Business Continuity Manager. Now I'm Business Continuity Consultant at Data Barracks. Katherine Corbishley should be joining us. She's having a bit of a tech problem, but I'll let her introduce herself when she does. Over to you, Martin, if you could introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you very much, Julie. Yes, I'm from BSI, and I guess BSI is most well known as a business standards company, but it's got a busy and growing cybersecurity and information resilience practice. And that includes incident response, e-discovery, security architecture, and penetration testing. And I spend a lot of my time working with organizations to ensure they never need our incident response services.
Okay, over to you, Tom.
Good morning, my name is Tom Booton. I'm head of corporate real estate at the Law Society, so I'm responsible for all of the real estate that the Society is responsible for, both in England and Wales and also in Brussels.
Okay, thank you, and especially thank you to Tom, because Tom's actually on holiday this week and has agreed to join us nonetheless. So thanks very much for joining us on your holiday, Tom. I know you've got some fantastic and amazing pictures to show us of the fire at Chancery Lane, so we're really grateful for you joining us. So I'm going to first of all talk to you about a flood we had at the SRA. I'm going to canter through this fairly quickly because I'm really the warm-up act for the others. So if you've got any questions about this, obviously pop them in the chat at the end, as we say, and if we can't get to them during the session, I'm happy to address them afterwards. So what I'm going to tell you about is a day that we had a flood in the Cube, which is the building that the SRA are based in. And just so that you know the logistics here, around the middle of the Cube are where the SRA floors are, and above it are some apartments and flats, residence apartments. And the issue occurred, the flooding occurred across all 3 floors, because to cut a long story short, there was a bit of a domestic marital situation going on upstairs, and somebody decided to turn all the taps on and block the plugs and so on. And what you can see on the screen now is the result. And unfortunately, I don't think you can hear the sound effects here, but that rain there is actually on the inside, and you can see here it bouncing off the floor. And if you can imagine what it sounds like when it rains outside and it's bouncing off the pavements, that's pretty much it on all 3 of our floors in the SRA. So that was a little distressing, to say nonetheless. And I got the call at 8:20 on a Saturday morning to explain that someone had found the rain pouring through the ceilings through all 3 floors, and immediately invoked an incident response team. We gathered around 9:30 to assess the situation as far as we knew it at that point, and the facilities team had already kicked in straight away. As it happens, we were extremely lucky in that Highways England, who are also located in the same building as us, had facilities people on site, and they actually turned up to ask if they could help us, which was fantastic, because the facilities people on the SRA obviously needed all the help they could get. And so the incident response kicked in. And I have to say, it was at the PCRE time, practicing certificate renewal time, which is the actual worst possible time for the SRA for this to happen. So we were really up against it in terms of minimising the disruption to the business. And that the flooding affected approximately 70 desks. That included IT, HR, finance, our supervision team, so quite a lot of people. And basically over the weekend, and we're very lucky it was a weekend, and here's my hot tip for you. I always say to people when I'm training on business continuity, you need a bit of luck on your side, and incidents happening on a weekend is the best thing that it can be, really. So we were able to work through the weekend, to relocate staff that were affected into other parts of our floors. And by Monday lunchtime, all staff were relocated to different desks, and the business continuity response was fantastic. The incident team were great. We made very quick decisions. We had the right representation on the teams. Facilities were brilliant. So huge thanks to your team, Tom, for their help on this, along, as we say, with Highways England, who helped us. And the communication was excellent. And I cannot emphasize enough, in any incident, the communication is the most important thing you do. We'll have the best plan in the world. You can have rehearsed it a million times. If you muck up the communication, you're in danger of mucking up the entire incident. And for us, the communication during this incident was great, and team working kicked in immediately, collaborative working across teams, across support teams. It was a really excellent response overall. But there were issues, as in any situation. The drying out process, which involved bringing in these huge dryers, was vital in order for us to continue the work in refurbishment and drying out. But the staff were extremely unhappy because they were noisy in their view, drying and made the areas hot because they were kind of sitting near where the dryers were. And we ended up escalating it to an operational director. And I said to him, it's like this, we can either take the dryers off during the working day, and it'll take 3 months to dry out, or we can leave them on in the working day and we can get you up and working in a month. And the director made the right decision in my view, which is that we actually, sorry guys, sorry staff that are near this, you're just going to have to put up with this, a little bit of discomfort, because we really want to get the business back to normal as soon as possible. And actually, you know, that was a good decision, because we did achieve what we needed to in the time we needed to achieve it. But it does emphasise that duty of care to staff is important in any situation. Don't neglect that they will still need to continue work in the face of whatever's going on around you. But luck did help us out, and as I mentioned, you know, it happened on a weekend, which was one big thing. But the other thing was, very fortunately, we had contractors on site who were refurbishing the toilets, and they were able to help us out as well. We're able to get materials, able to advise us, and they were a big part of, you know, being able to bring in the recovery in the timescale we expected, which was actually bang on 1 month, just about within a day or two, I think, Tom. So by about November the 23rd, we'd managed to move all staff back to their original desks. Carpeting and redecorating had been completed, and everything was fine. And then, can you believe, along came COVID, of course, and then about 3 months later, they all moved out again because we all went to work, home working. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over. I would have been handing over to Katherine now, but I don't know that we've got Katherine on board. So I think it's going to be over to Martin, if that's okay, James.
Hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, just to set the scene, an organisation was decommissioning legacy applications as part of its move to the cloud, and as part of this, it had to retain data from multiple systems for compliance purposes. So it commissioned a supplier to create a system to enable them to access this data when they need it. And while it's a simple example, it led to plenty of issue lessons learned. And this is what the finished system was going to look like. So you had a database with 4 terabytes plus of fairly sensitive data that they wanted to keep secure but maintain access to. And then there was the archive application, which users interacted with to access the data. And it was hosted in a public cloud system, so in its own virtual private cloud. And the end users accessed it securely over a VPN gateway from their internal offices. So it wasn't exposed to the internet at all, and you had to be an authorized person in the end user HQ building in order to access the data. However, they had to get the data in there in the first place, and also the data needed to be processed so it was all in the same format and could be accessed. So some temporary infrastructure was needed, and this was going to be created to process the raw data into the application server, into its own database, out to some storage, and then back into the database itself. So this design was presented and approved, and was looking secure, because you've got the suppliers and the end users both accessing it over the VPN gateway. But it was inconvenient for the suppliers to have to go to the HQ to develop and work on the system. So they spoke to the TechOps team and said, could they change the design? And the TechOps team duly obliged. So as modified, the system then looked like this. So you had the production virtual private cloud and a new one that was created, which they called development, which was a bit of a mistake in a way, because people's views of how secure development environment should be is often that it's less so than production. But in this case, it was holding live data, so that's quite significant. The developers were given the keys to the kingdom, so they were given full access to this virtual private cloud, so they could make any change they wished to it without any oversight. So first thing they did was say, well, we need some access. So they created remote desktop access to the servers, which is always a bad idea. There's even an FBI warning on it, because if you expose remote desktop to the internet, it'll soon be attacked and quite likely compromised. So that was a bad decision that was made. They also enabled access to the application server with a web interface. And again, this wasn't actually necessary, because as they had remote desktop, they could have accessed the application using that, but they decided to put this on the internet. And they also enabled a management interface as well, and left it with the default password. So all was fine for about 3 weeks, and they carried on their business, and then suddenly somebody noticed hacku.wr file had appeared on the server, which wasn't part of the expected installation, and caused lots of panic and running around. And incident response got involved. Now, as this was an isolated system, it was fairly straightforward to block it off from the internet and be confident that further access had been denied while the investigation proceeded. But it was then important to find out, well, what had been done, how far had people gone. So snapshots of the virtual machines were taken, data logs were gathered and given to one of our incident response specialists to analyse. And this is what he found. He found that the system had gone live at 9 a.m. and by the evening of that day, the first attacker had gained access via the default password. And over the next 3 weeks, while they were unaware of this compromise, connections were made from a whole variety of IP addresses in these different towns. There wasn't just one person who'd found it, it was plenty. All located in China. And for good measure, somebody located in Paris joined the party as well. So all these people were getting access into the system. They uploaded malware into the system, including a Bitcoin miner, I guess to try and make some money from somebody else's CPU cycles. They also tried to set things up so they could stay for the long term. So they created new admin accounts. They reactivated the guest account. So if their original access was blocked by setting the admin password to a secure one, they would still have access. They also installed remote access tools as well, which would give them an alternative way of accessing the system and issuing administrator level commands. But rather fortunately, they seemed to spend their time doing that and hadn't yet got around to probing the system deeply to see what other information was there. So rather luckily for the organisation, they hadn't penetrated through into the database and started exfiltrating the data that was in there. But this led to quite a few lessons learned, really. A key one was a lack of governance. So the organisation did have strong governance procedures in place that ought to have been followed, but in this case they weren't. So rather than there being a full diagram, there was just a presentation at a meeting. And when the Tech Ops received the request to change the system to allow internet access, then they just went and did it without any reference to security or anyone else. So the procedure in place weren't followed. They had quite immature cybersecurity culture. Now, security culture is something that's well known within the health and safety world. This is a statement from the Health and Safety Executive on what they think of as security culture. But it's also thinking about, we're thinking about that while individuals are often blamed for doing the wrong thing, and in this case, I guess both the tech ops and the developers did the wrong thing, the way they behave is largely determined by the organization they're in and the management drivers. So it isn't just an individual issue. So it's worth thinking about, what's the cybersecurity safety culture like in your organization, and how can you improve it if necessary. And so there are lots of lessons one can learn from health and safety about things that can happen if that goes wrong, and also how to do it well. The pressure to deliver impacted security. They were exiting their old hosting providers and decommissioning these applications. And there was a real pressure to get this done in time to not hold that up, because it would have cost them a lot of money if they'd had to renew the contract to allow the old systems to run for a little bit longer. And interestingly, there's a risk assessment methodology that's not seldom used now, but it's got some interesting table here that shows the threat level from non-malicious accidental activities. And while it says down at the bottom here that you'd expect system administrators to prevent a very low threat, I've certainly seen it at the level of substantial. And if you want to look at the reasons why, it talks about the group may be under enormous pressure to deliver, and a lack of training and awareness leads it to carry out unsafe actions for business expediency. So the people are trying to do the right thing by deliver the business functionality they're being asked to deliver, but due to pressure and perhaps lack of training, they're doing it in an unsafe way. And again, this links back to the cybersecurity culture. So again, it's very important to make sure that when there is pressure to deliver, it's also done securely. Then we've got supplier risk. So and this links back to governance. So the suppliers were given the keys to the kingdom, and they misused them. It was assumed that the suppliers would behave in a secure way. So when dealing with suppliers, there have been quite a few compromises linked to suppliers. In fact, some threat actors even target suppliers as an easy way into an otherwise secure organization. It's important to take the risk of suppliers into account and ensure that they are operating in a secure and safe manner. The protective monitoring hadn't been configured for this system, and as it happened, quite a few of the malware packages that were uploaded were caught by antivirus installed on the server and therefore didn't execute. However, the antivirus alerts weren't being monitored. There was very little other monitoring on the system. And in fact, had that been the case, then on the second day of the attack, the antivirus was triggered, and that would have led to discovery after day 2 as opposed to 3 weeks later. So protective monitoring is very important, even in systems that are considered being developed. And the organization itself was unprepared for an incident. They didn't have an incident response plan in place. So they were making it up on the hoof as to what they should do. And having an incident response plan is very important for an organization. You really need to think through likely scenarios that could occur and have plans in place to deal with them. Think about what sort of incidents there might be, because they can range from large to small, and there might be small incidents where you have the capability to deal with it yourselves, and you can have procedures and playbooks in place. So when something foreseen happens, you've got a process in place to deal with it. But also for larger incidents, we need outside help. It's worth thinking how you're going to deal with those, and rather than having to go through the the telephone book or Google wildly to find an organisation that delivers incident response, it's worth contacting them in advance and perhaps having an arrangement, say via a call-off contract, whereby you can pick up the phone to a known organisation and they will respond. And also, by way of preparation, you could have an initial engagement with them where they get some understanding of your systems, so they're not coming into an incident cold. So incident preparation is very important in this case and in all cases. So those really were the key lessons learned then. So poor governance led to the design being changed and also not properly scrutinized in the first place. Immature cybersecurity culture and pressure to deliver led to tech ops doing unsecure things. The suppliers themselves let their organization down by opening doors to the internet, and in particular putting something on the internet that didn't need to be there and with the default password, which is a very basic risk. You would have thought they would have known better. And then protective monitoring didn't alert the organization early on to the fact that they had been compromised. And incident response was made up on the hoof, wondering who to call. And luckily for them, it was a fairly minor incident in that while the attackers had got into the system, they haven't gone further. And you can imagine how much worse it could have been had this incident happened into a larger system and the attackers decided to deploy ransomware and encrypt all the data. Then that would have been a serious issue for them. So that's all from me, and thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Martin. That's really interesting. I'm sure everyone will agree that the cyber threat at the moment, especially with the with the current lockdown situation, lots of people working from home, things have often been deployed quickly, possibly without having chance to plug some of the security gaps in the infrastructure, endpoints, perimeter, and so on. So really important things to think about there. So thank you very much, Martin, very relevant. So we have Katherine with us now, I believe. Is that right, Katherine?
Can I just check you can hear me all right?
We can. I think we can all hear you. That's great. Well done on getting your tech problems sorted. Do you want to introduce yourself just 30 seconds before we do your presentation?
Really apologise. I came into the office so there wouldn't be any problems, and we had problems. So I did my plan B and my plan C, and now I'm on plan D. So apologies, because I'm actually at my desk, which is in an open plan area, although there aren't many people around. If you hear any extraneous noise, I'll apologise now. So I am a business continuity practitioner in a large law firm, and my remit is UK, Middle East and Poland. I look after 1,600 users in 15 locations, but globally we're 19,000 users in 189 locations. So it's going to be a race through, really. So we saw it coming, but we didn't see it coming. So as if global incidents such as severe weather, geopolitical issues, protests, etc. weren't enough, here we all are in a dynamic and long-running global incident. Previously, we've been through SARS, MERS, avian flu, AIDS, you know them all, and I wasn't convinced that this was any different. So is anyone getting it completely right? Well, we're all impacted, but sometimes in different ways. You could say that we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. I mean, there's no lack of evidence, advice out there about COVID. So last New Year's Eve, the world found out about this new virus. I started watching it closely. And then on the 31st of Jan, it was declared a public health emergency. During February, our regional leadership started serious preparations. We upscaled our cleaning regime, created awareness, published health advice, and all those things. At the same time, the global task force was initiated to support colleagues and clients in all the regions. So we ran a remote working exercise, not the first time, but the first time on a Saturday afternoon, and it worked. Lots of people were already used to working from home, but it was a new experience for many. Years ago, home working started as a business continuity tool, but for a long time now, it's been a business as usual tool. Feedback from the exercise was varied, but okay. And the conclusion was, we are confident we can continue to deliver legal services just without the fancy stuff around the edges. On the 6th of March, there was the first death in the UK, and on the 11th of March, it was declared pandemic. So now it's really serious. So now the run up to lockdown, we set up secondary and tertiary sites for essential support services. We didn't know which of our buildings would be most affected. We upgraded and enhanced our remote working environment. We increased our use of digital signatures. On the 17th of March, with schools due to close the next day, we instructed everyone to prepare to work from home and provided an information pack containing guidance. So on the 18th of March, that was 1 week before national lockdown, was our day one of office closure, everybody working from home. So on to the next slide, newly working from home. We sent out regular comms and held town hall meetings to keep people informed. The global CEO became more visible than ever before, and it really did feel like we were all in it together. We launched our COVID information area on our regional portal. We started planning our return to office in a 4-phase recovery plan. We actually thought we'd be back in by September. But further into lockdown, so through huge efforts, we found we still had work coming in, and some people were even busier than expected. There's been no interruption to our client service. Clients have different pattern of need and are more discretionary in their spending, but we can help most clients with most things. And as lockdown then started to ease, we planned a full sanitisation programme, and of course, clear desks are important for that. And then phase 1 opening was planned for mid-June. So it was different in different regions, but we opened some of our offices with 25% maximum occupancy. And actually, we're still in phase 1. So into the next slide, I'll talk a bit about issues. It's important to preserve the cash flow and be sensible about investment. So we did temporarily stall some of the projects that we had going. There's extreme pressure on essential support staff who remain on site in core rotating groups, security, post, print, deeds, etc. And these teams had to take on extra work normally done by people who couldn't come on site, such as legal assistants. So these support teams demonstrated that they're more than competent to do this. Because fee earners were used to pressing a button and things just happened. Of course, they always want it urgently. And there was a new intake of trainees, as usual. We had to create an enhanced online training program for them, because we can teach them the tech and the hard skills, but they tend to learn the other soft skills, such as negotiating, by observation. So we want to make the experience as good as we can for them. So going on to the next, there's some opportunities. So for me, recognition that the profile of business continuity is elevated. No one can now deny the importance of having business continuity plans. And we are conducting a complete review of how we will work in future, i.e. totally flexibly. There's a number of risks. There's a risk of a secondary incident while we're in the midst of COVID. Cyber, terrorism, system failure. So despite our best efforts, stuff does still happen. And we had some incidents. We had a fire in a technical room. We've had a few scares, some suspected and confirmed cases. It's important to be clear how to deal with them and to remain constantly vigilant. And confidentiality is vital in any law firm. We are a highly regulated industry. We do have multiple levels of built-in security and controls, but ultimately the accountability is with the user. So our IT security team increased their activities and awareness, and we re-released our mandatory IT security training for everyone. So on to the next, there's some lessons I'll talk about. We realized that remote working works. It allows people to do more in their domestic lives. It's important to be flexible and adaptable in how we work. Our continuity plans have to be agile. My pandemic plan didn't go far enough, but because we planned for impacts, we were pretty much prepared. Exercising has served us well. We have a mature business continuity management program with lots of responders who know what they're doing, so we could act well and fast, and we couldn't have done it without them. Essential support teams need to plan and to continually review those plans because people get tired. So we're maintaining split teams in rotation. And the support functions are certainly better valued now, and lawyers admit that they rely on those support teams. And communications, you have to keep it coming and ensure it's accurate. Update information, don't just set and forget it, because misinformation can be dangerous. The initial raft of incoming queries might have indicated that we weren't communicating enough with our people. Can we ever communicate too much? I don't think so. And I think that people look to their employer for solutions. It's said that people are likely to trust information received from their employer more than from the government. So next slide about, we're 7 months on now. Lawyers have to make active efforts to stay close to their clients. They can't take them out to lunch. Client relationships are important and they have become more personable, which is nice. We're trying to create some sense of normality despite not being in our usual locations. We're preparing for further restrictions and going into the next normal. And other activities still continue. Brexit planning is essential, and it's vital to keep detailed records. My timeline document is over 200 pages, and we're going to need that information as reference in future. And we've started our incident review process, even though it's not over yet. So then next slide, it's not over for anyone until it's over for everyone. So you might say that one of the best businesses to be in is in the field of law. Lawyers can work anywhere, but we're not bulletproof, so we have to work hard at it. COVID is an accelerant. It has brought forward what we were planning towards, which is full agile working. It's not the plans that are important, it's the planning process and exercising that counts. Most important are the people who respond. Our business continuity community stepped up and worked hard, and I'm so thankful for those relationships. We must recognise that we all live with this for a long time. There's no end in sight and we can never eliminate it. So I've got lots more aspects which, I could share, but only 10 minutes. So I'm happy for anyone to contact me independently, and my contact details will be circulated later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katherine. Really interesting, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate to a lot of the things you talked about then. And as you say, we're only part way through this, situation. Goodness knows when and where it and how it'll end. But yeah, there's some really great, lessons and observations there, Katherine. So thank you very much. So now I'm going to pass over to Tom Booton, who's going to talk about something that happened before COVID, BC if you like, which is a fire at Chancery Lane, which was, I believe, last January. Is that right, Tom?
February, yeah.
February, sorry, something strange has happened to time this year. So, so over to you, Tom, to tell us all about the Law Society fire.
So can you see my screen and can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Cool, okay. Good morning. So I'm going to talk about the fire. This is new for me. This is the first presentation I've ever done wearing a pair of slippers, so this is exciting. Just to set the scene, so I've got a picture up there, which for those of you that don't know the Law Society buildings, there's a picture there of the two buildings that we're talking about. The right-hand side is the main Law Society hall with the pillars, and on the left-hand side is 114 Chancery Lane, which is an interlinked building with the main Law Society hall, and it's the left-hand side building in which we had the fire. Our buildings is a mix of commercial office space as well as commercial event space. We've got a public restaurant open to the public in the 113 Law Society Hall, and we've got event spaces for weddings and the like, which is for hire on the right hand side. The left hand side building where the fire took place is purely office space. We had an event going on on the 1st of February in the 113 building, which is a dinner. The dinner had largely come to an end when a fire alarm sounded. It was investigated by our security guard on site, who went to the sounder that was going off. Strangely, there was no visible fire for him to see. It was only noticed, he actually went into a stairwell where the sounder was sounding, and actually the sounder fell out of the ceiling, and then in the void, he saw the flames and the light inside of it. So it wasn't actually a visible fire, as one would imagine a fire to look like, with flames roaring all over the place. So that confirmed the alarm, and the fire brigade responded automatically to our alarm sounding anyway. The fire brigade were on site within around 10 to 15 minutes and began to sort of attack the fire. I think at the peak it was reported that we had about 150 firefighters tackling the fire, which seems a phenomenal number, but when you consider you're having to rotate because you're on breathing apparatus and you're climbing up and down stairs and the exhaustion that's associated with that and recovery time, it probably makes sense. The fire itself, which is why it wasn't visible, was actually a void fire. So it was caused by an electrical heat buildup in a void in a stairwell. And then what happened, as we think, obviously it's very difficult to say exactly what happened with what was left over, but what we think is that because it was actually a stormy Saturday night that night, the investigating officer considered it that a wind had blown and actually moved the building slightly and allowed air to get into that void, and therefore the air just completed the fire triangle and off it went. Because of that, the voids in the building is where the fire was contained, so it generated enormous amounts of heat, but didn't actually enter the sort of main office spaces, strangely. So it was a sort of a fire that went under and around the sides of the building and created effectively an oven effect around floors that are impacted. The heat build-up, I think, was why the intensity. So the chap, the fire officer that was the commander of the scene, actually told me that had it been a more modern building, it would have probably collapsed within sort of 10 to 15 minutes due to the heat build-up. But the way buildings of this type are constructed with great big wooden joists, they're designed to burn and then char and then not burn any further because they become so charred. But the heat intensity was immense through the fact that it was contained within voids before it actually broke out into the open. I'll move my slide. Oops, there we go. And we became infamous with our own little segment on the BBC News website. So the fire, with the fire being in the void, this therefore presents another challenge for the fire brigade, and then they had to find a fire to fight effectively. So you can boundary cool by spraying walls with water, but then you also then have to pull down ceilings and lift up floors and walls and cavities in order to try and trace the source of the actual fire itself. So this is another reason why the fire took so long to bring under control, and we weren't given back the building until the Monday following the fire actually breaking out on the Saturday, because there was so much heat in the building still that it had to be monitored until it was considered safe to be given access to. So it's pretty devastating, really. It was on the 3rd floor at the rear of the building, and affected all the floors above, and consequently all the floors below were impacted in different ways too. There's just some pictures just to give you some idea. This is around the area where the fire struck. I think the most important thing to notice on the picture on the left where you've got the door, it's amazing whether you've got fire rated door or not, just having doors closed in office spaces prevents a lot of spread of fire and buys fire brigade time and also control of the building. So just as a note for people looking after buildings, closing of doors whether fire rated or not, whether fire rated or not is vitally important. And some of the evidence shown by some of the state of the doors on the fire side and the non-fire side were quite incredible, really. On the right-hand side, that is actually the fire well where the seat of the fire was in the stairwell running up the building. So it's 5 floors that go up there on that staircase, and it was on the 3rd floor, and the floor of the void where the fire broke out. But it gives you some idea of the damage and devastation it causes. And you can't imagine what this must be like. It's bad enough in a workplace, but you can't imagine what it's like for people who have fires at home with seeing this devastation to their property. Learning from this, that I mean, the process you undertake following a fire it can't be planned really to that much, because also you don't know what the impact is and how the fire is going to evolve. But certain things that we found helped us as we went through this process. So obviously the main one is your insurance or insurance broker. Getting your loss adjuster appointed early, so that you can then start in terms of the rectification begins as soon as the fire happens effectively. So building that good rapport with the loss adjuster is important, to make sure you get their support and they know what you're actually doing and how you're going about recovery. I found that contacting supply chain, obviously working as I do in real estate, I work with a lot of construction companies and facilities companies and the like. So it's very useful to have people that you know that you can call in to start help in terms of securing the building. So I actually had people on site and appointed on Sunday with agreements in place to actually start working on the Sunday. Obviously, I had to wait until the Monday before they're given access by the fire brigade. However, we were ready to start the recovery process as soon as possible. And by informing the loss adjusters of who I'd appointed, they were quite comfortable that we had trusted partners in place. Because obviously there's a lot of people that will be able to try and make a quick buck out of you if they possibly can. So it's good to have your relationships in place and your supply chain ready to go. Just as a tip, if ever you're fortunate to get this as well, it's another learning is that don't go into a building following a fire. So there are a lot of people that wanted to go in and recover things and have access to it, but actually the chemicals and nasty bits and pieces that get released by a fire and the dust that coats the building is hugely dangerous. So while it might be tempting once you're given access by the fire brigade to go and have a look or recover things or items, then just be careful, just wait, because there is a big safety element within the building after a fire. The other thing is looking at the practicalities, and these are things that you just don't necessarily consider, but and they might seem pretty obvious now, but at the time they're not. But lighting, you know, when you have a building go up in flames, you lose all of your power, all of your heating, water, everything's turned off and isolated. So just be prepared that the building is dark. We used to work in corporate office spaces where we had lighting and emergency lighting and all the rest of it. However, emergency lighting only lasts 4 hours. By the time we got around to Monday, the building was dead and inert and very, very dark. Electrical rescue, a lot of temptation to rescue electrical goods, laptops and the like from buildings. Don't touch them. Again, this is a learning that we had from the insurance people, is that smoke particles gather on circuit boards within electrical devices, and moisture in the air then turns those particles acidic, and that actually corrodes motherboards and can create system failures as well as potential sparking issues for future fires. So again, there's a technical thing that I hadn't learned about before. The security side of your building, you've still got obligations to maintain and look after the building, no matter what the state of it. So there's a case of maintaining the security of the building and what's left of it. So you can't forget that actually, in a weird way, you end up having discussions and disagreements and arguments with loss adjusters about contents and status of the building. However, your security policy and insurance policies are still intact, so you still have to provide the same level of security to protect the building, its contents, and also from anybody trying to get into the building to break in. It's again another obvious one, but it's something you don't think about at the time, but actual water does more damage than the fire. So while the fire's going up the building, the water's coming back down. So one of the big issues we actually had within the space was the water damage that was done with heavy ceilings of old horsehair plaster that become exceptionally heavy and are just great big sponges carrying an awful lot of weight. It's weight on the building infrastructure with the amount of water that's pumped into it, and then flooding in the basement. So luckily the fire brigade were really helpful. Actually, they did actually pump out our basement afterwards with their pumps to clear it. But it's but just beware, because actually a lot of people store important stuff, archive stuff, in the basements of buildings. And if you fill it with water, you're going to lose all of that stuff. So actually prioritization of where you're going to keep things is important, ensuring that you make sure that it's safe and secure in the event of a fire. We talk about comms in this group. So when the fire happened, I got a call from my facilities supplier on Saturday night at the time of the fire, and then I called round everybody from the organisation, from the chief exec down, but obviously it's late Saturday night, and surprisingly no one answered their telephones. So I set up a WhatsApp group and also had a WhatsApp group with my FM supplier so that we could coordinate everything from there. And actually, as it transpired, WhatsApp was more effective than any other means of communication, because it's an open channel. It's not sensitive, so there's low risk, but you can share information with people quickly and get people involved and understand the sort of scenario of what's going on. The IT side, we touched on it as we were talking about just now with coronavirus. Robust and flexible IT is so beneficial. We moved on as an organisation from sort of fixed desktops and laptops to everybody working off Surface Pros. So actually sending our workforce home was a relatively straightforward thing to do for working purposes. However, one thing we did find is that a huge number of people don't take their devices home with them. So we had a recovery of, well, a rescue of a large number of Surface Pros, which were also unusable based on what I was talking about earlier with particulate damage. Another one is to understand your insurance policy. So the Law Society is well insured in terms of what we have. So, you know, from the building and contents and the business interruption and the IT cover and the like. But it's understanding that and getting a good grasp of what your insurance policies mean to you and also what it entitles you to. Because when you're dealing with loss adjusters, it's all about allocating your insurances to the relevant policies and knowing what those policy caps are. So most of my, since February, it's been going through the relevant bits of claims that we have, and then they're allocating them to the relevant building insurance covers, and then following through with understanding that costs and that budgeting. I think for people that work in facility property related stuff, then be certain of your compliance records. So yes, it makes you nervous because obviously being responsible for real estate, you know, it's on your head really. So so there was a few nervous moments, even though I knew that my compliance was good and my safety record was good in terms, and fire management was good. It still doesn't stop you having a bit of a sleepless night worrying about the what ifs. So just be certain that you've got things to hand and you know what you have available, because the fire investigation team will want to look at that to understand that the building is compliant and secure. I think another thing that we found, which hopefully doesn't surprise everybody really, is how good the fire brigade is. So obviously this is what they do, but they're exceptional in terms of how they manage the situation. So a number of calls with the fire controller during the night while they're fighting the fire on the Saturday and into the Sunday. Interestingly, they did a research while they were en route to us, which they also have available to them anyway as part of their fire drill process. But they knew that the 113 building was the priority in terms of safety from a heritage and building significance perspective. So their actual priority, while it was to, in a normal scheme of things, to save life and save the buildings, the building in which the fire was actually occurring was less a priority than the building next door because of its historical significance. They also provide an awful lot of advice to you following fires as to you know, what they found and what was good, what could be better, and what would help them if such a thing were to happen again in the future. So a firebox at every entrance is a key thing, maintaining up-to-date building plans and the like. And the other thing that we learned is also, which relates back to my point about valuable documents or valuable items within your premises, is where those are, because once they've secured the building and once they've ensured there's no life at risk, they will actually spend time and effort to go and rescue valuable items for the organisation. So it's a very useful exercise to have an inventory and priority list of all those things that you would want recovered from your buildings, should you need them, whether it be professionally related or whether it's just artefacts of value. It's just understanding what those things are, so that they can help, because they will. Thermal testing is something else that's been we've had to do, is unsurprising, as part of our insurance renewal for the buildings, is thermal testing. So you know, we do fixed wire testing of buildings as a precautionary exercise anyway as part of our compliance, but also thermal testing is important because actually it can see beyond just a circuit test for hot wires that sit within buildings. So so if you do occupy older buildings and even newer buildings, to be honest, then it's worth thinking of thermal testing of your building just to be sure. And it also works in favour with your insurers as well in terms of managing your insurance renewals, so you can keep your costs down by showing due responsibility for the safety of the building. I think otherwise the other side was personal items. So I think we forget really that actually, you know, we spend a lot of time at work, and people's workspaces will become very personal spaces for them as well. So so we did a lot of recovery, and we spent a lot of time recovering personal items for people, which was invaluable for them and for us really. So to recover things for people meant an awful lot to people, and it was surprising the emotion that was involved with the fire. You know, we were all sort of pretty upset really, because obviously it's been our home, this building, so it belongs to us and it's part of our lives. So that prioritization of people's well-being and thinking, it talks a lot of these days about people's well-being and mental health, but actually this was very true here, that it did impact an awful lot of people far more emotionally than I ever anticipated it would. So rescuing personal items and the like, and allowing people to claim personal items is an important thing to do. And I think the other side, which is a nice thing to know, is prepare for the goodwill and help from your colleagues and peers. We were inundated with offers of office space, meeting room spaces, all sorts of things to help us through this, because obviously people realise what a disruption it is. But it was such a nice sort of surprise, really, to have this sort of this goodwill gestures that are offered from so many people that you would never really expect. And it's a case of taking those and understanding whether you can use them, but also preparing to receive that, because people are genuinely kind, both operationally and professionally. And it was very welcome that so many people offered so much to us to help us through what was a pretty difficult time. And that's it really in a nutshell. It's a big subject with a few things just to talk you through. I mean, just where we are now, we're sort of we had the fire in February. We've just finished gutting and clearing out the building now and making it safe. So it's taken that long to do. We've got a tin roof on the top of it at the moment, and we're just waiting for agreement from our board as to which way we go with reinstatement. However, it's taken till now to secure the building, so it's the last task at the moment is just drying it out, which I don't know how they'll get on a day like today. However, drying out the building from all the water damage is still going on, despite a summer of heat and air flow through the building trying to dry it out. But so that's where we've got to now. But anyway, I hope it's helped. Hopefully you never need any of this, and hopefully it never impacts you at all. But hopefully these are some useful tips just in case you ever do come across this. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Tom. Amazing. And what a great job done by your team yet again. It just makes me think, actually, listening to Tom talk there, it's absolutely vital when you're doing your business continuity planning that you consider the emergency and initial response to an incident. Don't assume it's going to sit with someone else, because until you have control of an incident, you're never going to get to the business continuity stage of recovering your systems or your processes or your business. So it's absolutely vital that your business continuity planning allows for that first response, initial response, be that liaison with emergency responders or your own internal response teams. We've had a question come in actually from the audience, which I'm going to just throw open to all of the panelists. And the question is, everyone mentioned out of hours issues. When it comes to testing, what's the best way to get buy-in for out of hours testing or exercising? I don't know if anyone wants to pick that up, or if not, I'll answer that. I don't know if you've got a thought on that, Catherine, if you've done out of hours testing.
Yes, we have. We have an IT testing window, which is Saturday night for 2 hours. So that's normal. Normally, I wouldn't run an exercise out of hours, but because COVID was so high profile and so important, I was able to get people to do it on a Saturday afternoon in February. But I wouldn't say I would always have that appetite.
Interesting. And for me personally, I mean, there's certain types of tests I would always do out of hours when I was at the SRA. And actually the way I sold it into the business and the highest levels of the business was I used to do a paper that justified the fact that if we're doing it out of hours, we can minimize business operation disruption, but also it gives us time to iron out any issues, you know, and actually replay things and redo things again, as opposed to doing it in the working day when you've got other pressures to think about. The other thing, obviously, really is to pay overtime, and I was able to convince the management team to pay, you know, time and a half for the staff who were involved. You know, which is always important to get people involved from a staff level, and it is important that you do, you know, involve as many staff as possible.
I have just remembered one that I did, if you want me to just very quickly mention it. Well, I think that we're quite at risk between Christmas and New Year, when everyone's away and they're all relaxing and not concentrating. So I did a quick call tree test for our leadership, top leadership, without any warning. Yeah. And it was amazing. That was very brave, I even got someone who was up a ski lift to reply. So I was really happy, and it worked really well. But it was a bit of a chance, to be honest.
Yeah, but you know what? Sometimes you have to take a chance because nobody's going to get warning about an incident. So you know, and test is all I can say. So thank you, Katherine. Martin, a question for you. What advice do you have for organisations preparing for and dealing with cyber incidents during lockdown?
Okay, so I think the thing to do there is go back to the scenarios that you've hopefully prepared, or if you haven't, run through them and think how they might be responded to differently during a lockdown. So, for example, what happens if a member of staff receives an email, clicks on an attachment and says, oh, look, my screen suddenly went a bit funny and then disappeared. You know, what's going on there? Well, with office-based staff, it might be they could take their laptop over to someone and they could start investigating it. But what happens if everybody's remote and away from home? How are you going to deal with that? You know, perhaps do you need to have a stock of machines that you can issue quickly so somebody can get back to work while you're looking into what went wrong with theirs? So things like that. So go through your different scenarios and say, how might they be different after lockdown? Also think about communications. So for example, if you've had a serious attack, then there's a high likelihood the attacker has compromised your normal channels of communication. So they might be reading all your emails, being able to monitor calls on your VoIP system. So again, you can't huddle together in the office to have a discussion. So think about, are there communication channels you can use, perhaps different email accounts on different systems, different telephone numbers that you could use to communicate about the incident, because the last thing you want to do is have the attacker reading all your responses and discussions about the incident they're causing. And then think about if you are engaging an incident response company, as many organisations do, if there's a serious incident, then how's that going to be impacted by lockdown? And can they get access to the premises, and how would they access the data that they need to do the analysis or documentation they need to look at? So think about things like that. And also generally on incidents, the UK National Cybersecurity Centre has got some very good advice on incident preparation on its website. And they even have a incident in the box scenarios for you to work through as well as part of your preparation. So the NCSC website is well worth a good look through.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. Tom, just one quick final question for yourself. Was it almost out of time? So Tom, if your fire incident had occurred during lockdown, different timing in other words, do you think that would have made a difference to how you would have responded?
I don't suppose so, because it was an out-of-hours incident irrespective, really. I suppose it would have been more of a risk. I mean, there's a question about whether it's beneficial having people on site or not. And we wondered whether it would have been better had people been in the office. Would it have been spotted quicker? But actually, having learned the nature of the fire, being a void fire and not visible, actually, I think it would have been a hell of a lot more dangerous and more of an incident than it was at the time. So I think there's a good question about whether, when you test in hours out of hours, if you test out of hours, then does it create a realistic scenario? So it's a tricky one to say, really, because it depends. You know, sometimes it would be better if people were on site, sometimes it would be better if they weren't. I think at the moment, based on the COVID scenario, we do have people on site doing construction works. We're doing some refurbishment separately anyway, so it would have probably been, you know, fairly easier to handle, I suppose, in essence, because we'd have had more eyes available on the ground in support. But as a fire occurs, there's only so much you can do, and you know, you have to leave it to the fire brigade to deal with it anyway. So it's a case of being quite realistic in terms of your testing as to whether it's of value or benefit or not, I would suggest, because actually in reality I found no one was picking up the phone on a Saturday. I think it's only me that's had enough to pick up the phone on a Saturday night. So
yeah, which goes to the other point I mentioned earlier, which is testing your communication. Just a tip for everyone: if you do a communication test, a call cascade test, or however you do it using WhatsApp, do make sure you do it out of hours, because that is the time when it's hardest to get hold of folks. Don't do it in normal hours, because it's too easy to just pick up the phone or talk to the bloke next to you. So I would always suggest that you do call cascade communication tests out of hours, because that's the most challenging time to get hold of people typically. So thank you, Tom. I think we're just about out of time. So thank you to all our panelists today for talking to us and telling us their experiences. It's been really insightful and helpful. So thank you very much, all of you. And also thank you, the audience, for listening. If you have any further questions or want to follow up on anything that we've spoken about today, do get in touch with us, and we can either put you in touch with a panelist, or we might be able to help you ourselves. But thank you for listening, and have a good day. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.